Hello everybody. Calling any car that costs £125,000 a bargain may seem like a bit of a stretch, but in the case of the 212 mile an hour carbon fibre tubbed 720 horsepower hypercar botherer that is the McLaren 720S, I'm going to give it a go anyway. And in today's video I'm going to be telling you why, if you've been looking at this and thinking, maybe I should, then you ought to be quick, because I don't think this is going to be a bargain for much longer. The tale of McLaren Automotive, the road car producing arm of the Formula One team, and the modern day iteration of McLaren cars, which gave us the legendary F1, is one of ups and downs in the extreme. Much like the performance of their cars, it would appear that they can go and then stop almost without a thought. And this is rather unfortunate, because at the core of it, what we have are some cars that are quite simply brilliant. The firm exploded onto the scene a decade and a half ago with the mighty 12C, and in one fell swoop gave Ferrari something of a bloody nose, but in the process learned a lot of lessons themselves as to just how difficult it is to actually sell cars to people that will drive them, and people who will be upset when they don't work, as unfortunately they often didn't in the early days of the company. Things then seemed to improve as the 650 came along and was in all regards a better car, with the possible exception of looks. Hasn't the 12C aged marvellously? They then attempted to go a little bit more mainstream with the 570S, and although on the one hand they earned themselves a whole new legion of fans, there were problems, because it would seem that in their quest to make a slightly more affordable car, McLaren once again began to cut corners. But in any case, McLaren's engineers certainly couldn't be accused of standing still, because it felt like just as the 650S was getting into its stride, they axed it and replaced it with this, the 720S. This was a take on the by then already familiar format. So you have a carbon fibre chassis, which here is now the mono cage 2 as opposed to the mono cell of the earlier cars. Like the P1, this doesn't just stop here, instead it stretches up and around, with this central spine on the coupe also being part of this car's carbon fibre core. And then out the back you had a now 4-litre version of the familiar V8 twin turbo built by Ricardo, which now made, you guessed it, 720 PS and 568 pounds-feet of torque. That's 770 Newton meters. For the gearbox, it was very much the same story, an evolution of that which came before, in this case a 7-speed dual clutch built by Graziano. The chassis also had the same trickery as we'd seen in the other McLaren Super Series cars, 12C, 650S and 675LT. So, double wishbone suspension at all 4 corners with adaptive dampers and something McLaren called proactive chassis control. Instead of traditional anti-roll bars, they instead have a series of interlinked dampers, the idea being that they could give you comfort that otherwise would have been unheard of in a car of this class in a straight line, but then around a bend give you all of the firmness of a race car. Unlike rivals Ferrari, McLaren were also very keen on a nice big rear wing, which here was also a movable item, raising as need be, or if you just press this little button marked aero down here with the active panel engaged, and when required deploying itself as an air brake. A real nice piece of theatre. It's certainly fair to say, though, that the looks of the 720 were very, very controversial. I recall seeing that first blurry spy picture that somebody captured from a rather unflattering angle at a launch do, and Oh, it did not look good. Indeed, when I then saw one in the flesh for the first time, I felt the same way about it. However, I have found since these are very spec-sensitive cars, and in the right colour, I think actually it's a very, very good-looking thing. My major criticism being the fact that there's a lot of panel gaps in it, and that's a shame when you've got a shape that is so elegant. To have it broken up in so many pieces, and often with rather large and inconsistent panel gaps, it sort of ruins the effect. But honestly, if you want drama in a car, even when it's not moving, you want this. Now, I first drove a 720S about 5 years ago when my friend James's dad, John, bought one. And it would appear that in the interim, McLaren haven't really been able to do anything to solve their age-old issue of horrendous depreciation. For a little bit in sort of 2022, it looked like things might have been getting better. But that later turned out simply to be a blip, and they were just enjoying the lift in prices that every other manufacturer did. And now things have settled, you can buy one of these, one of the fastest cars you will ever experience, for the same price as a very modestly specified 911 Carrera S. But, tempting though it may be, I hadn't actually driven a 720S for over 4 years. So I was absolutely delighted when my friend Guy got one, and he agreed to let me borrow it for a week. But as you might have seen in my last video with this car, it didn't get off to a great start. It is, I think, very, very true to say that I have had the full McLaren experience. You've already heard the negative side in that video, so today I'm going to talk to you instead more about the positive side. What are these really like to drive? Let's find out. Much like a great meal, the driving experience, as you might call it, of a McLaren begins before you've even sat in the thing. Open that door, and in case you're wondering how, there is a hidden little handle. And I've said to everybody that's got in this, don't look for it, just do what seems right. And you will then find that the handle is exactly where your body tells you it should be. McLaren get a lot of the details absolutely right. You'll then lift up this big F1 style door, which now features a large cutout for this roof panel that the older ones didn't have. Not all of the 720s have this Gorilla Glass in the roof, and it proved so problematic that for the 750, the facelift of this car, they ditched it. And that's a shame, because I actually think that these are much better as a coupe. The 12C and 650 I prefer as a Spider. You don't lose the looks, but you do gain a bit of experience and drama. For this though, I always felt that the 720 Spider just looked, well, a bit too busy, if I'm being entirely honest. You open that lovely door, which gives you a nice large aperture, and here they've also cut a little bit more out of the side sill, enabled by having this spine in it, and you can get into it very, very easily. You drop down into this beautiful, sumptuous interior, which here has all of this nice brown leather, and you drink in the shapes of it. Then you notice the entirely unadorned wheel, and this is another area where McLaren and Ferrari have taken opposite philosophies. Ferrari chuck as much as they possibly can on the wheel, and McLaren put nothing there at all. Both approaches have their own merit. It's the same for the gear lever. In a Ferrari, there are two individual paddles fixed to the column. Here, it is one big paddle fixed to the wheel, meaning that you can go up or down with either side of it. In this car, it's actually the regular metal item, which looks a little bit small and weird. Most have the optional larger carbon one. But in any case, the action, that click, that's beautiful. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because you see, the first thing that you'll really have noticed when you get in this car is the view out. It is absolutely incredible. I don't think there are many other cars out here which can match it. It really feels like there's nearly no car in front of you at all. And when you consider this is a modern car made to meet modern crash regulations, it's phenomenal. Absolutely breathtaking. This thing, I've been driving it around now for nearly a month, and it's It's just not got old, this. I love it. Now, because I have had it for quite so much time and I want to do a really in-depth piece on this, I am actually splitting this review into two parts. The first of which is this one, the one that you're watching, which is about the performance of the car, the exciting driving aspect of it. And the second is then going to be the living with bit. And there is naturally going to be a fair bit of crossover, but one thing that is relevant to both of those videos is the fact that McLaren with this appear to have lost a bit of the suppleness that their cars used to have and became famous for. I mean, let's face it, how many reviews of the 12C or the 650 have you seen where the journalist says it rides like a Rolls Royce? I can tell you, having sampled all of those, including the Rolls Royce, that was never true. But they did ride far better than you thought. The 650 in particular. The 12C actually isn't really quite as supple as people make out. A 458, I think, is a comfier car. Not the popular opinion, I know, but, well, that just seems to be how it is. This, though, there's no denying it. It is really quite firm. Even in comfort mode, it's still got a jitter about it, a firmness, and even occasionally a crashiness at low speeds that the old cars just didn't have. And while the comfort of this might be in a different league to the others, that may be because the performance of it is from an entirely different universe. So in this world, you have cars that feel fast from that seat, but then when you get in this one and you're in control, they no longer feel as quick. Then you have cars that feel quick when you're in this seat, but after you get used to it for a little bit, actually, the excitement begins to fade, and that's when that temptation sets in that maybe you should modify it, do something else. I've put about 600 miles on this car now, and I can still describe the full pelt performance simply as terrifying. This is utterly and totally savage. Yet, this car achieves something that is really, genuinely spectacular. You see, it has performance that is of such a nature, I am actually genuinely concerned that the cameras I mount to the car might simply be ripped off by the G-forces it's capable of creating. There are very few things I have ever experienced from either seat that would come even close to what this feels like. Not that long ago, I went out in a Koenigsegg, and the fact is that maybe as a result of just how much power you can ever put through two wheels, this feels just as quick, despite the Koenigsegg having some 500 horsepower on top. And this, let us remind you, new was a tenth of the price. Actually, compared with that particular Koenigsegg, more like a 20th of the price. That today you can buy one of these for just over the price of an M3 is frankly staggering. But that's not what makes this so special. What makes it special is that McLaren have made this a car with such ludicrously high limits, so involving. It's interactive, it's exciting. You can tell that every single person that worked on this car was really into the feel, the thrill of driving. I'd be shocked if just about everybody that worked on this car hadn't got a subscription to Evo, because this car is just monumentally good. Now, I love Ferraris, I really do, but when it comes down to it, if you were to tell me that I could choose any car to go from A to B without the worry of traffic coming, speed limits, police, or all that sort of stuff, I'd choose one of these. Because when you are on it, this car is virtually peerless. Not all that long ago, I got to test the Ferrari 296 GTB. their V6 hybrid, which has 830 horsepower. So even more than this, but I reckon because of the extra weight that car carries, some 200 kilos over this, in terms of power to weight, this is superior. And though, yes, at lower speeds, at lower RPM, 2000 let's say, the Ferrari would walk away from this, once the turbos here are lit, which happens at around 3000 RPM, ooh. But what I can tell you with certainty is that the reason this is so exciting, so engaging, and so trustworthy when it comes to doing high speeds is because McLaren have gifted it some of the best steering ever. And in this regard, it is also beaten by very, very few cars. Maybe the Lotus Evora, and I also happen to have one of those on the driveway at the moment, and I think that gets away with it because it just doesn't have the power that this copes with. And maybe a 570S is a little bit better too. But this one has just had the geometry done. This one is all set and perfect, and it's beautiful. It's got a lovely feel about it, a nice firmness, a nice amount of weight, not too much at low speeds, but then when you begin to pile on the revs, pile on the speed, it talks to you, gives you absolute rock-solid confidence. And that's important because, let's be honest here, there are lots and lots of fast cars out there, and they're nearly all capable of not just getting you into trouble, but getting you into really, really, really serious trouble. The important thing is making sure that you trust it enough. The important thing is making sure that you know you're going to get through that bend. And with this, you know. The gearbox also brilliant. It's quick, but it's exciting when you're really on it too. The car even sounds okay. Not brilliant in that McLaren tradition, and frustratingly, it's even better from outside. That view also means you can place it with pinpoint precision, and despite the fact it is a wide car, it's not daunting, it's not scary in the way that, say, a big front-engine V12 Ferrari is. And unlike the 12C, it is actually also a little more exciting to drive at lower speeds. Sure, you need to work with that turbo. There's been a couple of occasions where I've gone to make an overtake and I've found myself feeling a little stupid because you pull out, you put your foot down, and it doesn't go because it's at 2,500 RPM and it's just not ready. Now that's foot down, and then she goes. But you do begin to realise what you've got to do, then you learn to adapt, and it's all fine. The car is also just constantly delivering theatre, and yeah, sure, I have a few issues with it. Most of those are going to be covered in the living with section. But I'm always impressed that something that's so technological, has so many different features, facets, functions, aspects about it, so many things underneath the skin, can feel so natural. I mean, it's got variable drift control, for crying out loud. I mean, who needs that? Answer is, of course, nobody, but it's nice to know that it's there. Now, I would say that the traction control doesn't maybe feel quite as intuitive as in a Ferrari, and I don't feel like I can take quite the same liberties. That may be a me problem rather than a car problem. The fact is, with anything that has this amount of power, you've got to give it a lot of respect. And unfortunately, one issue that I have that does pertain to the dynamics and is therefore relevant to this video is how McLaren have set up their traction. Now, all of the car's dynamic features are controlled by what they call the active panel down here. The 12C and 650 have very much the same thing, and even the modern day Artura has an evolution of the same setup but controlled a different way. Now, the idea is, if the active panel is disengaged, the car will simply do what it thinks is the best thing for any given scenario. However, press the button and you can then control various different settings, including the powertrain and the handling, each of which have a comfort, sport and a track setting. You can then tell the car if you want to be in manual mode and if you also want the wing up by default, which I do because I think the car looks a lot better with it deployed. However, my issue is that if you have the handling in comfort mode, you therefore have to have the traction in its regular mode. And you can tell, if you really want to play with this car, that it is holding back the power a little bit. In the first week I had this car, this seemed to be a little more apparent, and over time it's become less of an issue. But I am fairly certain that if you want this car to give you everything, particularly on corner exit, but still with some traction, what you have to do is engage the dynamic traction control mode. This is not unusual. However, to do so, you must be in at least the sport setting for the chassis, which makes the car even stiffer. And when you're really on it, it's not all that much of a problem. But if you're not really on it, or if you're on it across a lumpy bumpy road, you do suffer a little bit. And you have to ask yourself and wonder, what is the point exactly of all of this fancy pants interconnected damper stuff? I don't really get it. I'm not quite sure what McLaren were thinking here. If you told me this was how an LT felt, I'd be more understanding. They're track biased by design. This is actually less comfortable than a Ferrari 488 Pista, but it does go just as well. At least just as well. This thing's just, well, it's just bonkers, to be perfectly honest with you. Having had the car for a while, it's also given me the time to really properly explore all of the elements of it. And one of those that actually has really surprised me is the engine, because it's much less responsive than I remember at low RPM. I seem to recall this being a big leap on from the old 3.8, and I said as much in some of my older reviews, but it's still a laggy thing. Compared to the Ferrari power plant, this feels like it's a generation or two older. Those are absolutely sensational. Maybe this does have more outright punch, but those are definitely a more exciting thing. They're more interactive, and I love them dearly. But I also thought that this just, it didn't have quite the top end of the older cars. The 12C and 650, you get to like 6,500 RPM and they give you a real rush. And I thought this didn't have it. I was wrong. You see, I was wrong because when you get to that sort of speed, oh, the turning circle also is that of the Arc Royal. But I was wrong because when you get to that sort of speed, those kind of RPMs, your instinct is just to back off because you are going so ludicrously quickly. But if you find the appropriate road, as I did the other day at night, at the appropriate time, with a little bit of light in the sky still, and plenty of visibility, and you put your foot down and you commit and you hold, and you go all the way to the red line, which is actually beyond the sort of 7.5 that it would imply, and it's more like 8. Well, it does really run for the red line at that end. Oh my, this is just, well, phenomenal. With that turbocharged lag, it feels like being on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. You see a distant system over there you want to be in, you lean over, have a quiet word with Mr. Sulu, you hear the sound of mechanics beginning to come alive, and then before you know it, everything goes blurry and warp speed has been engaged. Then when you look down, realise how quick you're going, foot down, air brake deployed, and you're back to sane and sensible speeds. You get the car warm enough, and at the right moment, you get a little pop from the exhaust too. And it's a really rather exciting thing. And the only issue, if you want to call it that, is that it does make that business of going fast very, 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 very easy. To the point that you're going along and you know you're not really doing anything that stupid, then you look down and go, ooh, but to everybody else, I probably am. I should really back off a touch. However, I really, really cannot criticize the car for that because it is exciting, and then when you do back off, it's still filled with drama, theatre. And yeah, sure, there are a few cars I've driven that go like this, but there are also a few cars I've driven that get the attention this does. Even in this very dour sort of steel blue shade, kids go nuts for a 720S. And yeah, guess what? Owning one of them might be a little bit of a pain. Things might go wrong, though hopefully you won't be as unlucky as me and have bolts fall out of the thing. Yeah, if you're wondering what I'm talking about, check that video out. That was extreme even by McLaren standards. Servicing and running one of these, it's going to be similar to a Ferrari, but to tell you what, if you're thinking about it, if you're giving even the vaguest thought, just do it. These are phenomenal. Sure, there are Ferraris out there that are basically just as good, can do just as much, go just as quick. They're another £100,000. You'd have to be talking about an F8 to really compare to one of these. Don't worry, those aren't warnings, they're just parking sensors. And you know what I'm going to do now? I'm going to get out. There's a beautiful little village green. It looks like there's a Marcos up there, and I'm going to get out. I'm going to have a pint of Diet Coke. I'm just going to look at it and drink it in. I didn't even tell you about the fancy dash, did I? You've seen that. Look at that. That's swish, isn't it? Just everything works. Brake pedal's brilliant. Did I tell you that? Because it is, honestly. What a crazy car. This, for the same money as a 911, honestly, you don't even have to think about it. Just don't. Take advantage of the fact that everybody is terrified of buying a McLaren. And that the new one is probably actually, I know, it's probably not even as good as this because they lose this. And I think this is a better looking car. And they're £300,000. I don't think we know how lucky we are. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed today's video. Don't forget, like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. See you for the next one. Bye-bye.